Welcome to My Best Friend's an Engineer. I'm Libby.
And I'm Lexi.
And today, our guest for the podcast is our very own Lexi. She's going to talk to us all about being a validation engineer. We thought it would be kind of cool because I feel like since we know each other in real life, I feel like we've talked about our jobs off of the podcast, but we probably haven't talked about it enough on the podcast for people to know what we actually do. So we're each going to do an episode where we interview each other, and Lexi's up first. So I'm going to ask her all the questions about being a validation engineer.
Yes, I'm excited. I feel like we have not gotten into details about our jobs. We kind of keep it very, very high overview, so this will be good. And also, I do not know the questions before, so this is going to actually be, it's going to be a real interview, so this will be good.
Yeah, and I feel I don't know about you, but whenever people ask me about my job, I have this one friend who's always so supportive, and she's like, how is it going with your job? And I just can't even explain. I don't know. It's hard to explain to people what you do. So I hope these are questions that can kind of have a good conversation for people to try to understand a little bit better about what validations engineers do.
Yeah, I'm excited because I am curious to see what you're curious about, because you're not in the industry. So I'm just wondering how I, made it seem in these previous episodes. So we'll see.
Yeah, and I'm interested from coming from more of the manufacturing background, as opposed to the med device background of if I'm going to be asking the correct type of question. But yeah, we'll get into it. I'm interested to see how it goes.
Yes. But how was your week? Let's get into that first.
Well, actually, wow.
Is it when was the last time we filmed?
I know, I was just about to say.
Yeah.
It's been a week. Brain mush.
Yeah, but we did see each other this past weekend, so that's why it kind of feels
I have things to talk about. Okay. So, this week has been good. We are right now recording on a Tuesday, and last Friday, my boss was on PTO on Thursday and Friday, and I was chugging along, getting my things done. I'm owning completely owning 2 full projects at this point, chugging along, working with the team members, and he calls me on Friday to go through step by step of my Microsoft project schedule. And my Microsoft project schedule is currently approaching 500 tasks of this project. So it took a very long time to go through. And he's on PTO, so I didn't really expect him to go through it line by line on Friday with me. And he calls me at 4 p.m. and we go through it, and he I don't know, I just felt so defeated because it was the end of the day. We're going through it line by line, and some things he's okay, well, did you ask this person this thing? And it was just happened to be something I didn't think of, and I was no, I'll put that on my list. So then I have this huge list of things to figure out. This is Friday. We get off the phone at 5:20, and turns out I have to present to the VP of our engineering department on Monday. So I'm okay, well, obviously I'm not gonna just leave this to Monday. Being the type A that we are, I was I need to get this stuff done so it's organized. I have a clear path forward. So I ended up staying at work until 7:30 p.m. And then I came in on Monday.
That's crazy.
My boss was he was thank you so much for getting all that done, but I hope you didn't stay till 7 at work on a Friday. And I was well, I lied. And I was I went home and I did it. But no, I stayed at work because what did you expect me to do? I wasn't going to not do it until Monday. So
yeah,
that's how my week has been so far. I hope I don't have to do that again. I wouldn't be surprised if I did, but I kind of felt Benton vibes walking out of work at 7 p.m. I was this kind of feels like pulling an all-nighter at college again.
I know. Actually, I had the same experience. I came in, but I came in early. It was we got to site at 5 a.m. and it was the sun was rising, and I was oh my god, we're walking in, and I was this is Benton vibes. But
yeah.
For everyone who doesn't know what Benton is, it's our engineering building where we used to
pull all-nighters. Good clarification. Where we used to literally live.
What?
I wish Benton, I wish it would have had showers. If it had showers, and if it had showers, A,
game changer.
And B, if it had a community fridge, I literally would not have paid for rent. I just would have lived in the engineering building.
Literally. Well, the Skybox, and I think we talked about this before, so that's the place where you could access if you had executive, like if you were on the executive board of an organization. They had a communal fridge and like a sink and a couch. No showers. But that was always helpful. I liked that. Because I would put I'd go grab lunch, and if I had leftovers, I'd just leave it in the fridge. And it was empty. No one would take advantage of it, so that was good.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's how my week has been going. And then personal-wise, I feel like I don't really have much. I kind of was walking out of work even just today, just kind of realizing that between commuting an hour each way and being at work, that takes up 13 hours of my day. So I just was walking out of work today and I was like, oh my God, this is so much of my day each day that I'm doing this. But, we're still on that time blocking grind. I'm going to try to start using Notion, which I don't know if you've heard of Notion, but I think you've heard of Notion.
Yeah,
right?
I've heard good things. I've heard it's there's a learning curve to how you have to figure it out and everything and the best way to use it.
Yeah.
But once you get it, everyone apparently is hooked.
Yeah.
So.
Who knows? Maybe next week I'll be coming back telling you I'm hooked. But tell us all about your week. How has it been? How's work been going? How's life been going?
Yes. Pretty good. I mean, I'll be at Wisconsin this week, so a little bit of travel. Golfed for the first time this past weekend with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think what else. It's weird because we just saw each other, so it's everything that's going on.
I know. We saw each other 3 days ago.
Yeah. But I'm trying to think. Yeah, not much. I mean, traveling. I feel like my Wisconsin project, I actually got this project last August. So to give people a timeline in their heads for how long some of these projects actually might take. So yeah, now I'm finally able to run it. So exciting.
And we're going to get all into what your projects are like on today's episode.
Yes. And other than that, personal-wise, so I went to Pilates yesterday and it was a cardio one.
Update us. How's it been going?
Yes, it's been good. I'm on my 3rd class already. And I bought 4. So it was 4 classes for $80 or $90, 4 for $90. But the unlimited is $200. So I'm I don't know.
Okay.
I feel I don't have. Speaking about our little financial literacy, I don't have too many expenses. So I'm okay, I'll splurge on the workouts.
You should.
I'm yeah, but I used 3 in 1 week. So I'm maybe we're just excited, but I don't know. So,
I feel
it was good.
You said $200 for unlimited classes. I feel that's good, especially if you go 3 times a week. You could be going in 1 month. You could be going 12 times.
I know. I'd be so fit.
Just $20 a class.
So fit and fun. But then yesterday in our cardio class, it was the first cardio class I've done. We were doing jumps on the little reformer. Oh. You know what the reformer is, right? It's the little...
No, I don't. Please educate us. What is the reformer?
Okay. So it's a little table where you lay down and it's basically horizontal. And I'm trying to think of what equipment I could compare it to, but I have no idea. It's kind of I would think of a rower setup, but you can... It's attached to springs, which is where you get the resistance, and then you literally... pool yourself. You're connected to yeah, it's all body weight. So and I don't do I don't do weights. I'm more of a cardio girl. So I was so excited for this little cardio Pilates, and we were doing these jumps. I felt so silly. You literally are on this little bed kind of that's rolls. That's a good way to compare it. And you're just bopping your legs are just tapping. And you're
so this is silly. Pilates.
I was I feel like a frog. I was so I don't know, I was sweating by the end of it, so clearly something was working.
Okay.
But it was so funny. I was oh my God. I was looking around. I was everyone else is doing the same thing. I was good.
So you'll have to let us know next week if you decide to do the unlimited classes or not.
Yes, yeah. I'll let you know. But I don't know. I was okay, that was kind of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, nothing, everything else. Nothing crazy. But.
We're just chugging along.
All right. We have our spill the tea. Spill your STEM tea. Why did I just stop?
I was like, is she gonna keep going?
She stopped. Okay. All right. This individual said, heard some juicy gossip about Tesla production issues. What are they? I'm gonna Google that after.
I don't know. I just watched a documentary on Netflix about Tesla, and it was really, really interesting. I don't know what the name of it is. Actually, it might have been on Hulu, but it was just really interesting. They interviewed like an electrical engineer and a project engineer, and they no longer work for the company, but they both just looked so sad in the documentary because like just the amount of stress that they were under while working at Tesla.
Yeah. Like, oh my gosh, I can imagine. I'm reading the book about him now.
Yeah. You'll have to give us an update.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm like, everyone has such like what's that word? They have just opinions that are just like on both sides of the spectrum with him. Like, so I'm like, I'm just gonna read about him and see what, make a decision for myself. But it's very interesting.
Interesting. Well, we love that. Okay. Talia's tea of the week is that she is moving to British Columbia to start a new job for this summer. That is amazing. Congratulations on the new job.
So exciting.
And if you guys want to be featured on future Spill the Tea segments, we post a question box on our stories on Instagram, so be sure you're following our Instagram if you want to spill the tea with us.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you so much, Lexi, for coming on the podcast this week.
Oh, no
we
problem.
Get into it, can you give our listeners a brief bio, share the background of what you went to school for, what your degree was in, for those who don't know?
Yes. So my name is Lexi. Okay, I feel so silly. So I went to Miami University of Ohio and graduated with a chemical engineering degree, and I have a biochemical concentration. I am currently in the medical device industry and I work as a validation engineer. So I do process validations as well as equipment validations, which we can totally get into in more detail later. But
yeah, I was about to say, if you just do like a quick Google search of like define validation engineer, Google tells us that the validation engineer will oversee, evaluate, and calibrate equipment, systems, and procedures used in the development and production of products and will ensure safety, quality, and purity requirements are met. So now that we know what Google thinks a validation engineer is, can you give like what your definition of what a validation engineer is?
Yes. So I would say in this industry specifically, a validation engineer is someone that makes sure that all the requirements set by the regulatory agency or regulatory body of that certain product are met within testing. So what that means is, each country has a different regulatory body. So for the US, if you sell a product or manufacture in the US, you have to follow FDA guidelines. So my job is making sure that our products and our processes, so processes such as like manufacturing process, so compliant with the requirements that they set. So I would say Google's a little more wordy.
I know. I feel like Google makes it hard to understand. But I actually didn't know that, because that's interesting. It's completely different industry, but in my new job, one of my projects is, we call it like rest of world, and it's getting the product to the rest of the world. And I'm currently having to deal with the regulatory agencies in all those countries demanding all of this data from me. So have you ever had to deal with like any of the other country regulatory agencies?
Not specifically, like not directly yet.
Okay. I'm not sure if it would be the same, but like, for example, I'm working on a product right now that is going to be launched in Europe, and the testing agency that I'm working with is called DECRA. So I don't know if it's the same, because it's a completely different industry. I don't know if that sounds familiar.
Yeah. So you're gonna be testing my knowledge here. So, but just as a disclaimer, I'm going to talk about this, and this is my personal experience with validation. So I've worked at a lot of different sites, and I know, that it actually varies significantly with each site. So if you want, I can go into a little comparison. of like being a validation engineer at my first job and my second job.
Yeah, share, because you are on your second role post-grad, so if you could kind of like highlight maybe the differences or do a comparison between the two roles.
Yes. So my first role, I was in specifically only the pharmaceutical industry, and in my current role, I work, with both pharmaceutical products as well as medical devices. I do mainly medical devices now. So in my first role, I was executing a lot, which that means I was actually doing the testing of the protocol that my team drafted. So a validation engineer, you have to draft these protocols, making sure that all the testing that is required is met or like included. So at that first site, we were working with I think it was 60 bioreactors we were validating. So that takes obviously a lot of time. So I think
definition. What's a bioreactor?
Okay, a bioreactor is that's very, it's like, I would kind of.
Is it like a chemical process or is it like a biological process?
It's a biological process and it's a piece of equipment. So I would compare it to just like kind of an ecosystem. So you can basically make a bioreactor do whatever you want it to. So, in this case, we were working on a COVID vaccine. A bioreactor is basically just a vessel that you can create, a cellular process in. So you can culture these cells to produce what you want. So for our case, it was culturing the cells to work towards that COVID vaccine. So that's a very high overview. But you can do a lot with a little bioreactor.
You're testing all those different ecosystems.
Actually, we did not do that. So, okay, well, now I gotta go into detail for exactly what goes into a validation. So, see, I feel like it's like a little onion. You're like peeling back the layers.
And we are just peeling it back.
So, basically with validations, there's an IQ, OQ, and PQ portion. So, for the IQ and OQ of an equipment qualification, you're literally just looking at the piece of equipment. So, the PQ is kind of going back to what you just asked. Brought up, going into the process of it. Like, we're actually using it during the PQ. And the OQ, I guess, technically. But for our bioreactors, we didn't actually use it, like the process. And that is because we kind of did all of the testing on one bioreactor initially for the OQ and PQ. And then all of the other, 59, they were considered like for like. So we were able to just get by with using all the testing on one and then just doing like a very, kind of like a condensed IQ OQ for the other systems. So the first system was technically called a first in family, and then the rest were like going through that condensed testing.
Oh my gosh, so many new terms. I feel like this is like
I know.
language.
Yes. So, so now I can go, I feel like I should follow your questions. I feel like I shouldn't just what a bioreactor was.
So you're taking these, you were describing how in your first role you were working on bioreactors. You described the process with the IQ, OQ, and PQ. Oh, we were talking about what is the comparison between your first role and your second role within the validation realm.
Yes. So in that first role, because we were hired as consultants by the firm that I worked for. So the protocol was drafted by another individual on my team, and I was kind of brought on site to just help execute that testing. So I talked to her, and I think the process was about 4 months to draft that initial protocol. And it was like over 100 pages because the bioreactor, especially like a COVID vaccine or one that is used to produce a COVID vaccine, is very high risk. So obviously it'll be very detailed. So it took her about 4 months, and then the rest of our team was kind of focused on executing all that testing. So some of the tests included the pH. So we're making sure that the pH, which was the worst test of all, oh my God. So we would have like a control, and it would just take so long. We would do, check the speed of the pumps and turn them on, make sure they reach that speed for X amount of time if that was, stated within the protocol, and then we would pass that. We did alarm testing, so making sure that all the alarms, if, I disconnected a probe of the bioreactor, it would go off, and then making sure that that alarm is captured within the audit trail. So, making sure that everything is recorded, which is a huge thing in the medical device and pharmaceutical industries, making sure that everything is traceable. what else? And just
so it kind of sounds like I'm just trying to think back to like because I come from the mechanical background and I only really had to take chemistry and chem lab in college. So what I'm kind of gathering, it kind of sounds like you have almost like a chem lab, like you have your procedure and you're going through, you're doing all these tests, you're recording all of the data, paper trails, we love them. You're just making sure that everything is documented and the process is traceable. Is that kind of correct?
Yes, definitely. Okay. So that is correct. And then, so I did that for a few months, and because there were so many bioreactors, so it was a very, redundant and repetitive job. But, I didn't mind it too much. It was fine. It was, great learning experience because a lot of the times you're not able to work on the actual equipment, which I'll go into a little bit more in my second role. But I did reach a point in my first role where I was able to start actually drafting my own protocol. There was a separate project at the same site. So it was the requalification. So, when you're considering this equipment, usually it's defined within the site's master validation plan. Okay, a bioreactor can be considered validated for maybe 1 year, and once we hit the 1 year mark, we have to do this other certain testing. So that was my project. So I actually was drafting that. So that was pretty cool. So because the girl that drafted the first one for that larger project, she was my mentor. So it was kind of like, kind of cool to have like the mentor-mentee. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to see that project through because I transferred or changed to this role. So in this role, I do not do a lot of executing. So this is a huge difference. So I'm mostly drafting these protocols. So I'm trying to think. So a lot of them, I actually focus more on process validations now instead of equipment. I have done a little bit of equipment validation, but definitely not as much as my first job.
When you say process, are you talking about are we trying to picture like the process? And again, sorry for the mechanical innuendos, but like, are we thinking of like a production line and like the process that a production line takes? Or are you talking about like the process that like someone testing the equipment would go through to get the results? Or like, what does this process look like?
Yeah, so the process that I focus on is the first one that you mentioned, the manufacturing process. Okay. But if you do, testing in the lab, that process has to be validated as well, and that's called, test method validation. So I can touch on like all the different types of validation, but I'll keep going about my second job. So process validation is kind of what I focus on. And to give an example, there was a single-use mixer bag that they used at site, and that process was already validated, but my scope was to validate the use of this bag multiple times for multiple lots in a row. So kind of changing that process and making sure. So like the main focus was the mixer bag, but we had to do that whole process just to validate that step of that process, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. So this maybe is kind of like a good transition into my next question. You talked about what validation engineering was like in your first role. You were doing some like more of the actual hands-on testing, and then in your second role, you're doing more of the drafting of the procedures. So what is the typical career path of a validation engineer like in the med device realm? And validation engineers kind of start off by doing a lot of testing and then go to writing procedures and then go into like management roles, or like what does that kind of sequentially look like?
Yeah, so I think, if you are with a consulting company, this is my personal experience. If someone's listening to this and they're like, oh, she's so wrong, like I'm a validation engineer with 10 years of experience. This is just my point of view. So I have seen the, consulting firms, I think they hire a lot of younger engineers to do that hands-on work. So I think, in my situation, I think I was very lucky to get that hands-on. I think a lot of people don't start with poking, $100,000 bioreactors that are going to make millions of dollars of product, That was crazy. Don't tell my other job, but I totally broke some pH probes. Like, it's okay. They knew. I'm not, but like, it's just crazy because you're like, oh my God. Like, and they were easily replaceable, like whatever. But I'm like, that's scary. Like, I don't know. So I think I was really lucky, but I don't think a lot of people start off that way. But my point is, if you start with a consulting firm, I think that's the way it kind of goes. Then they kind of, because it's very redundant. It's not really hard. Like, you know, you don't need an engineering degree to do that. You need the engineering degree to understand how to make the strategy, which is kind of what I do in my current role. Okay. So I think I see, you know, my direct manager, he went obviously the managerial route, which is definitely something I want to pursue. I do see a lot of, you know, validation engineers that stay technical in my experience. They stay, you know, my other coworker on my team, he straight up told my boss, he's like, I don't want to manage anyone. I want to be a validation engineer, and I want to write these protocols and do these these, you know, tests when needed. And then, like, I also heard, like, at the site that I support in Illinois, there was, like, a person who was a validation engineer for, like, years and years and years. So I feel like a lot of these validation engineers, in my experience, they stay technical for quite a bit of time.
Leading into kind of sticking with the career path, like, theme, what aspects of being a validation engineer originally drew you to this career path post-grad?
Yes. So I knew I wanted to do pharmaceuticals or medical device industry. So that, you know, narrowed down my options. Keep in mind, I graduated May 2020 of COVID, so I was also willing to accept whatever. So I got lucky with my first job at the consulting firm with a referral, and that is when I just really liked validation. So I can also go through kind of like the different teams I work with, and like, because it's funny because one of my coworkers from my first team, one of my mentor actually, she switched to a quality role and she loves it so much more, and I'm like, I would never want to be quality. So again, validation, you make these tests, you understand the requirements that are set by the FDA, and you kind of propose that strategy to the quality team. And the quality team, again, this is just from my experience, this might be different at each site, but the quality team confirm, like, they sign off, they're the final approval, they, you know, they have the last say on these protocols. And kind of, if the FDA comes in, they're responsible for handling these audits. Of course, the other teams support them, but it's kind of, I don't want to say on them, but it's kind of, they have the highest risk and, you know, impact if something does go wrong. And then we work with the engineering team. So automation, they help us understand the technical parts of it. So I have to go to them and I have to say, what parameters do you need for your process? You know, what speed, you know, give me those numbers. Hopefully they work. So yeah, those are kind of the main teams I work with. And then, of course, the production and manufacturing team, that we also work with them to make sure that, you know, we can schedule it, we can understand what the lot size requirements are, XYZ, what specific product we're producing, like all that stuff. So
I want to get into a little bit more about like how the FDA kind of regulates all of this testing and how that kind of like motivates what you have to test. But before we get into it, for our listeners, I don't know if we've touched on it, but when you have been talking about like these manufacturing teams that you're working with, the cross-functional teams, are we picturing like syringes being made, any and all med devices? Are you specializing in one type of med device, like kneecap replacement things, prosthetic hands? Like, what type of med device are we picturing in our minds?
Yeah, so, okay, good question. So I have worked with syringes. I'm trying to think what other products. I work with humidifier adapters. So specifically the actual validation that I was on that project was a packaging validation. So I wasn't working with the actual adapter. I was actually working on the packaging. So it was like the film and then the paper with the label. So that was interesting. That was like my first time doing a different type of validation. So that was pretty cool. I have a formulation validation as well that's going on. So the actual product, which is just kind of like a lube gel, but a medical one.
A medical lube.
Not, yeah. So that's
how do you validate
one of my
medical lube?
It's just like a mixture. It's just like the common name is really unfortunate for this podcast to say, but that's what I'm working. So okay, I'm trying to think what other devices do I have.
So is this in the the validation, because I'm picturing like a manufacturing line. You said a lot of times you're working on validating the process. Are you mostly focused on new products and validating the process for brand new products that go to market, or are you focusing on validating existing products that are already on the market? Like, what phase are we in with the product life?
Yeah, so my first role with the new bioreactors, they were completely new bioreactors. This current job, I have one new piece of equipment I'm working on. Product-wise, though, it's mainly innovations or like improvements. So it's, for that packaging validation, we switched the material due to supply chain issues, which was a huge source of a lot of these validations coming up. So for the formulation project that I just talked about, it was because the supplier couldn't supply that, raw material. So we had to change that specific raw material.
There was a shortage of lube?
Well, I don't even know. I can't remember what the specific...
I wonder why. During COVID, everybody was home.
We're gonna have to rate this one explicit. Yeah. Okay. So what else? I totally lost my train of thought. So it was the packaging material.
We're just talking about like the different things that you've got worked on for validation.
Yeah, so then I have new tubing coming in. That's another project. And then the mixing bag that I told you about, it was because there was a shortage of that specific mixing bag. So they had to find a way to be able to reuse it, which that one kind of irked me, honestly, because it's in the name. It's a reusable, it's a disposable mixing bag, like single use, specifically. Right. So I was like, okay, it kind of irked me a little bit, but we did find a way to make it work, and it was, it was okay. But I was like, they come to me and they're like, we need to use this 3 times. And I was like, that is not what it's intended for. I was like, okay.
Oh, that is so weird. So you had to test it to be able to have it be used 3 times, but it was only single use. Interesting.
Yeah. So so a lot of it, and like, I do want to get into this or like touch on this a little bit. It's a lot of validation, which is why I like it, is spinning, like, things and trying to make it work. So that's why I think I like it so much. And like I kind of mentioned about how my mentor switched to quality. I mean, I think quality does play a role, and like they have to strategize too, but I think, they kind of just approve or deny what I come to them with. It's like I kind of suggest, okay, maybe let's try and make it work this way, and they're like, yes, no. Most of the time they're like, don't,
Got
no.
it.
It's like, oh, okay. It's like, I'll come back with a better idea. But so for that situation, I had to find justification. I had to find data that proves that our product won't be impacted if we use it, more than once. So I love that part of validation, though.
You're really in like the deep core of essentially problem solving itself. You're presented with the problem. You have to figure out how to write a test plan to do the testing, to qualify it against some FDA regulations, and then you present it to the quality team for them to either approve or deny.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because the FDA regulations, a lot of them, if you read them, they say, this is guidance, this is not requirements. And it's so open-ended. It's all about interpretation, and they do explicitly say some things, which is really helpful. We love when they do that. But some things, it's just like, okay, well, they say this, and this is what it means, but they're not saying it. So it's just like they love to keep it vague, though. Little FDA.
Lots of gray area. Sounds like.
Yes.
So this is probably a good time to transition into some questions that I had about like the testing and working with the FDA. So I have never worked with the FDA before. I don't have much experience like within that realm of regulatory agency. So my question is, and maybe this is obvious, but who defines the standards in validation? Is it the FDA? And like, how do you guys, as a validation engineer, how do you get that knowledge? Is there like a database that they like share it out on? Do you get a little email, or like, how do you find these documents?
Yeah. So yes. So each product, it depends on where you manufacture and where you sell, but each regulatory body has their standards that they set. So, for example, we can focus on the FDA. They have, you go to fda.gov, and they have a lot of their guidance documents and their standards listed right on their website. So the medical device process is under 21 CFR 820, which you can literally Google. It has all these different aspects. It talks about like production, it talks about packaging, labeling, and it kind of has all those requirements listed. But you could go further on the website, and then they have like these guidance documents that kind of, again, they're guidance documents, they're not requirements, but they kind of help you push you in the right path, is how the FDA likes to put it. And they also have warning letters on their website. So a warning letter is basically your face.
It sounds scary. It's warning.
I know, I am scared. Yeah. So so basically when the FDA comes in and audits your site, if they find something that's that's not correct, they issue you a 483 observation. And if the 483 observation needs to be escalated, it kind of is escalated into the warning letter, and you have to respond, I think, within 15 business days, like exactly stating what the root cause of the issue is, how you're going to solve it, like the timeline of when you're going to solve it, your literal, like the actual plan. You have to document all that. So they have those listed on their website. And I actually wanted to do a TikTok series of this, like reading the interesting ones, because there was one, and it was a cannabis company that I was looking on the website.
Okay.
And they were like selling like CBD stuff to horses and humans. And it was so interesting. Yeah. And it was so interesting because I was reading through the letter, and they were literally pooling, like, I don't think they audited their site. They literally pulled from their social media. They're like, oh, because the finding, I think it was, they are selling a new product without going through the approval process with the FDA. So again, like when you have a new product, you have to go through that whole process, but that's more of a regulatory affairs issues, which I would love to have someone in regulatory affairs because I still barely know what goes into that. But so you have to, bring that new product to the FDA. So they were claiming in the warning letter that they didn't bring any information to them about this product, but they claim that they sell it. And they literally pulled like ratings. Like someone was like, oh, this is awesome. Like my horse was like doing so well on it. And I was like, and it was so funny because it was like literally in parentheses, like I think someone did like the UR, and I was like, I can't believe this is an FDA.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
like,
I was going to ask you,
awesome.
I was going to ask you, like, what's an example of like that? Is it a 43 letter that you get issued? Like, what's an example of something that you might do? And you can make it up. Like, what's an example of something that you would do where you would get that?
Yeah, so one example would be, I'm trying to relate it back to, well, actually one that I was looking at, the site, I think, failed pH testing, and then they retested the pH, and then they retested it again. So in some scenarios, you're able to retest the pH, but if you fail a third time, then that's when you have to open an investigation. And so this is kind of how I was mentioning with like the response to the FDA letter. It kind of goes the same way. So when you have a deviation, which is where your test result is out of spec, you have to understand what the root cause of that is. You have to state what your plan is and what your timeline is to solve it, or like what the impact on the product is. So the claim was, the FDA was saying that they didn't do that properly on their site, which is true. I agree. I agree with the FDA, but...
So do these FDA requirements, like if someone were to right now go on the website and look on the FDA, are there specific like are these like quality requirements they have to abide by? Are they like chemical like specs that you have to abide by, like, or a range that you have to fall within?
So the only time I've seen specs listed is in USP, which is like the I have no idea. I can't even remember. So USP, let me Google it actually. It's like pharmacopoeia something. USP guidelines. Oh my gosh. Yeah, US. Okay, it's... I know, I'm telling you, it's like a layer. I'm trying to make sense, but... Okay, so USP is the US Pharmacopoeia. So I guess I was right. I got one word right. See, it's like there so hard to remember all this stuff. But, so they actually listed like so they list water testing requirements. So they listed like for your TOC, which is total organic carbon content, you can't pass, like maybe 500 parts per billion. So I think that's the main time I've ever seen like these specs. Just because in my work, I don't, for process validations, again, I told you it was like kind of broad. So I feel like the process you don't have like a set, like, oh, this, machine has to run at this speed or anything. So just water testing is what I've seen, like the actual specifications listed by the FDA.
So to kind of walk through the process, you find out like a new project. You have this new product that you have to validate. From there, you go on the FDA website and you're trying to find the relevant information or FDA guidelines that are applicable to that product. And then when you get into writing your actual test plan, do you have to like come up with work instructions that you then give to operators or like the people who are running your testing?
So if it's an operator running the test, so usually in my experience, there have been site SOPs that exist already for that testing. So for example, I would write it in like manufacture, this product per SOP XYZ.
Okay.
Or if there's only a few steps, I would say manufacture per SOP, XYZ steps 3 to 7. And like if there's line clearance, don't clear the line, because if we're trying to run like multiple lots, and then that line clearance would be, not needed. I like it when that happens, but if that doesn't happen, then you have to explicitly either create work instructions, which is nice because it's a separate standing document, or you just have to literally list it within the protocol and make it clear. And I think like one thing off of that, what helped me in my first job is that each step was exactly written out. So it was like, okay, click start. And so it would be like the way that the protocols are set up. It would be like test step, it'd be test step 1, test description, expected results, and then does it pass, yes or no. So the test description would be like turn the machine on, and then like the expected result would be machine does turn on, and you would have to write in does. But it was like literally all these mini steps, so it was like so nice. Okay. It was like you didn't even have to think. So like on a Monday morning you don't want to think. I'm like, okay, let me go play on this
let me just read the instructions. I'm good at that.
Yeah. So, and then one difference when I was coming to these sites, they were not writing it as explicitly. Like, it was literally not in a table format. Some of these protocols, it was like literally like a little paragraph that they would write. And I was like, oh my God, this is just like, I wouldn't want to read it. Like, it's just a huge paragraph explaining all these steps. I'm like, so that's another difference. Like, I think that first job really helped me because, again, the pharma standards are so much higher and like more stringent than the med device standards. So that kind of helped me and my type A personality.
No, exactly what I'm doing. Time block out my testing schedule. Please tell me what to do.
Yeah. Like I told you, my mentor wrote that protocol. She taught me so much. Like, if she's listening to this, hey girl. like I literally.
I'll read it to your mentor.
Yeah, she is like, if I'm type A, she's like type AAA. Like,
oh my gosh.
She was such a good.
I didn't know it could get more A than you.
I know, I know, right? But no, she was a great resource to learn from. So I learned so much at that first job. So
yeah. You talked about, okay, so I'm kind of interested because, again, coming from like the mechanical background in my most recent career change, now I'm very much into the consumer product world. Just thinking about this from that perspective, you talked about how sometimes lines will have SOPs that you can kind of like maybe like reference when you're doing the testing. Do you in your role ever have to like get clearance or work directly with the manufacturing people to like get permission to bring the line down? Because I'm assuming when you're doing this testing, that's a time period where they can't produce. Like, do you ever have to work with like the demand schedule of the product or like anything like that?
Oh yes. So I don't know if you remember, well you probably do, when I was talking to you about that frustrating situation at work, like it was a few weeks ago, like that was the only time. So we are still working with it, like that project still hasn't been finalized, but again, this is like where the strategy comes into play. So, it was an acquisition, so their company didn't require additional testing, so that PQ, I'm considering that additional testing just because that's the third phase. They were saying that only an IQ-OQ is acceptable. But per my company's standards, because we acquired them, we have to do for new equipment an IQ-OQ PQ. So the struggle with that I was getting from the production team was they were like, okay, well, this PQ run is going to be a week. And for PQ, you have to do 3 consecutive runs because that proves the process is repeatable. So if you do it twice, it's 50-50. Once you get that third time, it's over the 50% mark and you know that your process is repeatable. So the backlash was, okay, this is 3 weeks. So if we're gonna have to hold product for 3 weeks, they make a lot of product in 3 weeks. I don't know the specifics, but it was like a big deal. That's why we had that whole stuff. So then, I'm working with the quality team. I'm like, okay, I agree that this is unreasonable. It's, pretty low risk equipment, but because of the way that my procedure at our company was written, we have to do the PQ. So we actually ended up writing in a quality plan that allowed the product to be released at risk. So they're able to, still produce, release it. We're going to make sure that all the test requirements are met and, in process QC inspections, but they're still able to release the product. So that was kind of our solution. So that's kind of an example of your question. But to answer it in the short terms, yes, unfortunately, validation we are tedious. We are a little bit frustrating. And it's, I'm sure it's so frustrating for these individuals that have been working at this company for 30 years. And this girl comes in and I say, the FDA says this.
Yeah.
like we have to do it. But again, it helps because I have these standards to back me up. I have that verbiage. Like I have someone else that knows much more about this industry than me. So,
right. Is there anything that, like, with working in validation and just, like, with the FDA and in med devices in general, is there anything or any scenario that you've encountered in your job that, like, shocked you? Like, whether it be, like, the amount of money spent or, like, the time it takes to do something or, like, the process it takes to do something or anything like that?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I loved the high adrenaline rush of my first job. Like, we were making we were validating the equipment for the COVID vaccine. Mm-hmm. If our validation wasn't done by a certain time, like that was millions of dollars of product that wasn't able to be produced.
Yeah.
And it was just insane. Like we would work 12-hour days. Like I think, I entered the team when this project was like high up. So these people, like the people that I've been working with, like if they're listening, they're like, oh, she didn't do that much. Because they were doing it for weeks before me. And I'm like, I admire them for that. But so that was crazy. I loved that. Like, and it's the first job too. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like going to my pH probes and I'm like, oh my God. Like, don't touch them. Like, don't touch the ends.
12 hours a day.
Yeah. So that was shocking. I think another shocking thing is how much people try to get away with being in the medical device industry. So, for example, like I made the comment about the single-use bags. Mm-hmm. It was a low-risk product, so that's why it kind of evened out. But again, like if it's supply chain, your whole production line is done. If you can't get a certain bag, like what are they supposed to do? One other interesting. I feel like I'm rambling. I'm so sorry.
No, this is good. Keep going.
So one other thing that was interesting is we were talking. Okay, how are we gonna release this product? Da da da. And then an individual on the quality teams, told me a story. She's like, oh, at my previous company, we used the justification of releasing this product because if the patient didn't have this product, it would be of higher risk than if the product was maybe adulterated or like there was a defect that was not. Yeah, and I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, that's crazy. Being the one to make that call, I was like, keep me in validation. I said, hands off. We'll brainstorm, but no, I mean
that sounds like high stress, definitely high stress environment.
Yeah. So so that was crazy. So that was shocking as well. Again, like how people try and spin the rules. Like, it's just funny hearing these conversations because like the engineering team, like they're like, no, it's no risk at all. I'm like, boy, I'm like, there's a lot of risk.
You're like, the FDA, I have it right here. We got it is a risk.
It's like I printed it out and highlighted it and redlined it.
Yeah, right. Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, okay, so I have one more question for you. It is a question that we ask all of our guests on this podcast.
Oh,
but before we get into it, before we get into that last question, is there anything that like I didn't ask that you wanted to touch on, or like last minute comments, thoughts, anything about like for people who don't know what validation engineering is, anything you want to touch on?
I don't know. I feel like I just word vomited everything about my life right there.
That was so good. I feel like I learned so much, like, because I'm trying to relate to like roles that I work with, and so like the more you explained like the process, the more I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense.
One other thing about my job is that I enjoy is reviewing the validations of vendors. So basically the scope of that is just to make sure the vendors we're using, they actually do the validations up to the requirements. So, and up to our standards as well as a company. So for example, I review a lot of surgical glove validations from China. And that's so interesting because sometimes I'm sent them in Chinese and I have to request from the Chinese, the team in China, I have to ask them to translate them because I'm like, I can't. So that's interesting. Also working with all these different countries. I'm trying to think. I have worked with vendors in India, but nowhere else, honestly, too crazy. But yeah. I hope that makes sense. I'm just trying to explain it from my point of view. Again, some people might have different experiences, which I would love to hear about, honestly. I like working with these different sites. It's always interesting to go in and see, how the validation team works with all the other teams. But yeah, that's my experience so far. And I'm very happy. Again, I told you how my mentor at that first role, she's like, nope, I want to be the last say. And I said, you do you, girl. I'm going to stay right here and have the second or third say. I was like, that's fine. It's second in line, that's fine with me.
You're like, I'm just going to stick here.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, I really enjoy it. I just really got lucky, again, with my first role that it was something that I really enjoy and I can see myself staying in. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the question because you are still a guest until we finish the question. Wait, what is the question again? Okay. Knowing what you know now. I was about to go into a totally different question. Okay, so knowing what you know now, what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self?
I think we answered this once before, and I think I'm going to change my answer because I don't think this is what I initially said. I think it would be... Ooh, now I have another one. Okay, actually, I guess they align together. So I would say be more confident and, stop caring too much what others think. I guess does that go together? I don't want to give two answers because I think that's cheating. I want to
No, I think that totally goes together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is very important. I think, you know me. I was I'm always thinking about what other people, how they're perceiving me. And I'm like, you know what? It doesn't matter. I think it's important to be straightforward. And that's what I've learned in my role so far. And little Lexi, stop it. Stop caring.
Come on, little Lexi. Listen to the podcast, little Lexi. Okay, well, that is all my questions.
Amazing.
Thank you for being a guest on this podcast. You can now transition back to being a co-host. You're done in the guest hot seat.
That was so fun. That was actually, oh my gosh. I think I have to organize my thought. Yeah, I think I just need to again, it was a layer. I was cutting and throwing all the terms around.
You were tossing a salad, you had turnips in there, you had lettuce, you had onions, you had carrots.
Yes. So I hope it made sense, but no, those were good questions. They were questions that some of them I didn't expect. So good.
I love to see. I know it's just so hard when you have a job and you're stuck in this bubble. And then even when I'm talking with Brett about my job at the end of the day, I'm always ignore what I'm about to say because I'm going to vent to you about something, but you're going to have no idea what I'm saying. It's totally speaking a new language, which I feel is why sometimes it's so hard to get acclimated to a new engineering job is because you literally have to learn a new language.
Exactly, yeah. So, yeah, and that's why I'm saying it might vary from site to site because I had, two different very big experiences from my first role to second. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's all we have for today's episode. Unless you have,
awesome.
I don't want to cut you off. Do you have anything else to provide to our listeners?
Nope. I think I word vomited enough.
Well, you guys, everyone should join our Facebook group. It's linked in our Instagram bio, and then it's also in our show notes. And you can reach out to Lexi if you have any specific questions about validation engineering, because we do have a little spreadsheet in that Facebook group. It's a career spreadsheet, and you can fill out your information if you feel comfortable with people reaching out to you for advice and questions. So if you guys are listening and you're maybe thinking validation engineering might be for you, definitely reach out to Lexi and ask her more questions.
Yes. I always love talking about my job. That sounds so nerdy, but I don't know, like, even just telling you the stories, I was, like, getting so excited. I was like, oh my god, someone wants to listen, because I feel like, I don't talk about it that much.
I feel like that's why we get so hyped about this podcast, too. We both just, like, love talking about career things.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, if our listeners want to reach out to you and learn more about validation engineering, where can they find you on social media?
You can find me at Engineer Lexi on Instagram and TikTok. How about you? My wonderful interviewer.
You can find me at Libby V on the label. And if you guys like this podcast, please consider sharing it on your social media. The more it gets shared, the more people can hopefully, find some value in this and, get help with learning more about careers that are available to women in the STEM fields. And how did we forget to say this? Don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating and review. You can do that on Spotify and leave a written review on Apple Podcasts. We are currently doing a giveaway, so fill out our Google form alongside a review and you'll get entered for a $100 Visa gift card. You can follow the podcast on Instagram and TikTok at My Best Friend's an Engineer.
And on YouTube at BFE Podcast.
Okay, great. That's all, folks. That's all we got for today's episode.
That's all we got. I'm Lexi.
And I'm Libby.
And thanks for listening to My Best Friend's an Engineer.